And that was his part in the development of nuclear weapons. He was fooled in believing it was a good idea. Now he's held himself responsible for that.
So there is probably, we could probably create some agreements here as far as we know in human history back, is that we are probably at a time where, you know, the potential weaponization of the eradication of our species is probably at an all-time high, if not now, close to now. And so it stands to reason that with the incredibly rapid expansion of technology, many technologists refer to it as an exponential growth period of technology. That's the likelihood of future techs coming online of being even potentially more destructive is likely. We're talking about particle accelerators now, looking at making miniature black holes, and who knows what else is, you know, of some of the recent stuff I've read is quite remarkable. And so the potential in the future of, you know, technology might make nukes look like child's play compared to what's available in maybe even in the very near future. And so now we'll get back to this idea of using an empirical measure of the population. I mean, I think that's a good...
I'd like to contrast that assertion that we're more weaponized than we've ever been with the contrary assertion that fewer people may be dying in war as a percentage of the population today than ever in history.
Sure, I agree with that too. But the potential is maybe at an all-time high of potential for, because of the potency of tech that's currently on the table and future tech that's likely to emerge because of the technological expansion.
If wars are like firefighting, if wars are like forest fires, though, potential for a forest fire is really measured in the aggregation of time since the last forest fire. We're making guns, and if we were making sticks and stones or just piling you know, piles of stones for the next war, if we hadn't had a war in 40 years, our piles of stones would be as bigger than they've ever been, right? Like, the stockpiling of weaponry is a constant behavior of human society.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's possible that an assertion like our stockpiles are as big as they've ever been is an assertion that we have had a longer time of peace than we've ever.
When in the hell was that? We have had constant wars ever since the beginning of the Second World War. It hasn't stopped. It has continued.
It was before that.
Well,
yeah.
I would still agree with Ben, though, in terms of the magnitude.
I disagree with that.
Okay, well, maybe it's not true.
Not so much that it is a percentage of the population.
Okay.
I mean, we're breeding like rabbits. What it is, I think, is more important is that it is the ratio of combatants to non-combatants that are killed in war.
Okay.
And that has never been higher.
Okay, that's interesting.
Non-combatants has been growing. So it's gotten worse.
I have heard some. I've not verified it personally, but I've heard some similar arguments about that. Is that like kind of what you're saying? Is that it depends how you look at the numbers, and it depends on how you classify certain ideas about, you know, what's war and what's, you know. So I guess if we flex our definition to some extent, I think there maybe a case could be made for both scenarios, you know. If we use like maybe a classic definition, you know, standing army versus standing army type stuff. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think you're saying it's the best of times.
It's the worst of times?
Oh,
yeah, I've heard that somewhere before.
It seems like this might be a trend.
Yeah, so let me though try to make an agreement here, is that it's likely that with technological advance and the historic, I don't see a time in history where new technology wasn't, you know, looked at as far as how it can be weaponized. I don't see a chapter in history, when I look back from what I can see, where mankind did not weaponize new technologies. Okay?
I mean specifically mankind.
Yeah, as overall, right.
No, I think specifically mankind.
You like the wrestler?
No, I mean that the spinning wheel doesn't appear to ever have been weaponized. I mean,
really?
The whole history of female...
Is Kevlar not a fabric?
Technology is really not weaponizable. It's defense technology, yes, but you can't really kill people with Kevlar.
Shield versus spear. is an arms race.
If you accept for a moment the notion that textiles is a female art and follow its history, I don't know, maybe it's possible that women have been innovating without weaponization. I'm just throwing that out as a possibility. I'm not saying it's
Maybe in a different culture too. I mean,
Men kill more
it's
people.
Western culture.
Wouldn't they, in World War II, looking at that, wouldn't it be kind of impossible for our men and American men to do everything they did without the economic support of what was happening back home, with the women being empowered and going into the labor force and all that? I mean, wasn't it a whole society at war? Or am I misreading that?
No, we traditionally only keep track of who does the killing.
Oh yes, but women can kill with a look.
But from the way it was portrayed to me in my history classes, it's kind of the entire society was rallied behind the doughboys out there doing their jobs. And so it was buy war bonds and save your bacon grease, and we're all in, and, go troops. So, when you have that kind of scenario, and today when you look at the economic colonialism and kind of the economic terrorism or warfare or whatever, how harsh language you want to use, you can kind of argue that the net effect of our collective system itself enables those that are in charge of us, gives them the power to go out and do these type of things. So it's that indirect,
Can, but you should.
Yeah, it's not.
I don't think anybody's ever actually said and meant, well, what the problem is? We just don't really have enough wars anymore.
I bet that's being said in some circles.
There are people who have identified that that's the cause of their economic dislocation, yeah. But it's not. People have to be lied to and frightened before you can talk them into going to war.
Okay, sure. Didn't we say last week that the first truth is the first casualty of war? Yeah.
I think that
Some insight there.
That those who are warmongers want to make sure that we don't get so involved in it like we did in the Second World War. That's why we have a volunteer army and volunteer services now, and that's why coverage from the media is so cut off.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I guess kind of like orchestrated in how they do that. So they don't want us to actually feel like we're at war. War is, I guess, from the general public, kind of, it's not happening. And not in any sense that, touches upon me.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got to have that in order to prosecute wars, and especially since they've become the forever wars.
Sure. So just looking at, to your point, just looking at the statistics of terrorism, like your actual chance of being, harmed or killed in a terrorist attack are far less than all types of other crazy things, like getting struck by lightning and all, What's that?
What a mess.
More people die from
terrorism.
So so the continued propagation of this, so it's clearly propaganda. The how much the threat of terrorism is being imbued on us every. That's pretty clear to me. But
Isn't that a lovely war, though?
Yeah.
You couldn't imagine a much better war than that.
Which war are you referring to?
Well, if you look at the morality of war, the most moral war is a war in which you are able to change the political, you're able to achieve the political goal with a minimum amount of human pain and suffering. Arguably. And maybe Gandhi is really close to being the ideal for this, right? Like basically a peace war, if you will.
Yeah, sure.
I think the next most moral war is like a cyber war,
Okay.
which strikes me as a wonderful form of war, and we should celebrate the fact that we're having cyber wars rather than wars with bayonets. Like this is progress. Terrorism, in a way, could be argued to be a more moral higher up on this moral continuum that I've painted,
Mm-hmm.
right, than, say, a Napoleon War, where you're basically filling ditches with bodies.
It's an interesting idea. So what about the potentials of this cyber war? For example, if you have like Chinese hackers that are very successful at hacking like Raytheon and, you know, Lockheed Martin's, you know, defense servers and stuff like that, getting access to incredible technologies that are, you know, next gen, like our new advanced planes and stuff, that could spell, you know, a future that's even more horrible than the bayonet scenario.
Really?
Well, sure. So, like, what if some of the weapons that Michael was talking about, surely that are now into next generation phase, right, are now widely distributed?
My information is 20 years old.
That's what I'm saying. So that's likely that the, you know, the current stuff is like,
I think
You know.
that the net effect of a few of those is that it puts a stranglehold on the development of those things at those companies, because they have to create an intranet which is completely off the grid. They have to
Mhm.
restrict the amount of people that can work on the project. It reduces their ability to develop next gen weapons, and that, in retrospect, might actually be a good thing. It's probably a good idea that we not
I
barrel
think
full
that's
speed down the.
I think that's an apple pie and wonderfulness look at the possibilities. It doesn't take Raytheon to come up with an hideously destructive weapon. It takes
Raytheon's not
five-
working on hideously destructive weapons. I'm sorry, but all of the
I'm sorry.
weapon systems we're working on
They
today,
haven't told you about it.
all the research since Ronald Reagan has been going into less destructive weapons. The J-DAM, I think they're called, is a bomb which, rather than just obliterating, quote, a city, can actually take out, you know, a particular part of a building.
GPS guided heavy bomb.
Yeah, basic guidance systems, and look at Star Wars is essentially.
And they also created the
defensive.
weapon that the Iraqi army called
The
Steel Rain.
Moab, is that what it's called?
No, they called it Steel Rain. It's a JPEG, not a JDAM. And it drops itty bitty tiny little bombs all over the place where you don't want the enemy to go.
To go later, to the mine,
It doesn't matter when they get there.
it's waiting for them.
It's if they're there, it'll get them now. If they're not, it'll come and get you. They'll come and get. Yes, I mean it's interdicting real estate with. We don't bury our landmines. We just leave them out in the open so they can get pinged. It's not. We don't talk a whole lot about our anti-personnel weapon. You ever heard of a beehive round?
Yeah.
The beehive round was started off being used in Vietnam, but it's gotten a lot bigger since then. That was a 105 howitzer. They've got one that's in a 12-inch gun now.
cool.
And that means I get to pick an area 175 meters in radius and kill everything.
Okay, but a UAV, just as another example of what I'm talking about, right? And I think we understand, based on public news sources,
where the big dollars have been going in new weapons. And UAVs are an example of another weapon which is designed essentially not to kill. Like, it's designed to avoid accidents. It's designed to allow the person who is launching the quote missile the opportunity up until the last second to verify that they have the right target. And so
That's
forth.
designed not to kill?
Indiscriminately.
Oh, okay,
Right,
sure,
it's
qualified like that,
intended.
sure, okay.
It's intended to allow, I mean, essentially you have like, you know, Control Z on a UAV launch, whereas with the old, you know, Scud missiles and whatever, you just indiscriminately point and shoot and, you know, whatever happens, happens.
So,
These little bombs, your little accurate bombs. But then there's even littler inaccurate bombs, like your depleted uranium. depleted uranium is radioactive warfare. You know, that's what it is. And it stays up in the atmosphere and gets on into dust.
Stays on the ground.
Yeah, it screws up people.
Half-life's only 113,000 years.
Yeah. and we're using it. Our troops are getting sick from it. Iraq is essentially got it all over the place and having skyrocketing birth defects all over that country from depleted uranium. This is radioactive warfare. And do we recognize it as radioactive warfare? Do we even know about it, John Q. Public? I don't think so.
So are you kind of, with that kind of comment, going back to this technological progress is like an axe in the hands of a pathological criminal kind of mentality?
What I'm also saying is the illusion that our weapons are more accurate, that may be so, but that is so damning when you consider that the ratio of non-combatants to combatants has grown. What does that say? Oh, we've got more accurate weapons that we're killing more innocent people with.
What else could it say?
I think it's probably that's what it says.
It could be that the wars are currently being fought by people who are more willing to use civilians as shields than they have been in past wars. You can also say that.
I see kind of this like imbalance in the world, if we stay on war for a little while, about a geopolitical kind of situation, right? Whereas, like, if I have this huge cannon pointed at somebody, and then I'm saying, hey, you can't have a huge cannon and pointed at me, no way, and they say, well, look, you have this huge cannon pointed at me, right? And then I just say, well, I'll never use it. You're just crazy. The obvious psychology there is immense. You got a means to destroy somebody, and it's there. It's triggerable. It is potential. It's a potential, and that potential is definitely a powerful mechanism. It's a mechanic no matter what. A potential is still a known potential is something in reality. You see what I mean? Yeah, please, Michael.
If somebody built the Dr. Strangelove machine, that's the one that, if anybody shoots a nuclear weapon, 450 deeply buried nuclear weapons spew radiation over the entire world, and everybody dies. If that was done, it would probably statistically reduce the number of people willing to start a nuclear war by 75, 80%.
Sure. So would we, obviously we wouldn't do something, for example, it's totally fantasy here, but obviously we wouldn't do something like give every single person in the world a button that, if pressed, right, destroyed the world. Clearly that would be, the world wouldn't last long, right?
Right.
Somebody out there would press the button. Clearly they have the bell curve and a whole nine. So onto this next quote here. If we continue to develop our technology without wisdom or prudence, our servant may prove to be our executioner.
Mm-hmm.
I'm concerned about the lone wolf, the mad scientist who in his basement
Sure.
through genetics puts together a biological weapon
Sure.
that no one has a defense for.
Mm-hmm.
Or some other mad scientist might build a nuclear bomb, get all the materials together, weaponize it somehow. How are you going to defend against that mad scientist?
I think it's probably very difficult, especially if their technology is extremely advanced. So the more advanced the technology, the more potential for potency of mass destruction we encounter. At least that's what I see when I look back over history. If I go back 100 years, there's no such thing as a potential for a nuclear winter.
So I have an interesting observation that I think is very relevant to your point within the general construct of the night, and probably more illustrative than this quote. 9/11 hijackers picked 4 planes, and they had done their research. And the 4 planes that they picked were Boeing. They happened to be fully loaded, long-range flight, because they had more
fuel. But it wasn't an accident that they chose Boeing airplanes over Airbus. Airbus is 50 years more technologically advanced than Boeing in terms of how the airplane is flown. It uses a system called fly-by-wire, and what he said. In a Boeing airplane, the pilot is literally connected by an unbroken mechanical chain to the flying surfaces. There are hydraulic systems that augment the power and help, can be turned on and off and various things. But ultimately, that stuff can be disabled, and the pilot can have uncontested control of the airplane. Had they been in Airbus planes, or had Boeing adopted the technology that had already been completely adopted across the entire fleet of Airbus airplanes, 9/11 would have come out very differently. So I think it's never clear that new technology is somehow inherently more dangerous.
Could the Airbus airplane have been taken over remotely and flown and landed safely?
I think that is a question that Airbus will demur on and say that at very best that is a classified question.
And they would certainly try to stop the conversation before it got to the fact that, and if they could do that, well, they could take it over and fly it into anything they wanted, because it's all software at that point.
Yeah, any really great hack.
And that's the thing about huge projects. My favorite one is the thing to save us from the asteroid. We're all, man, there's a whole push. We need to put a system in place so that we can prevent the catastrophe that ended the dinosaurs. We need to be able to knock that thing out of the orbit that's going to destroy us. That totally ignores the fact that if I can keep it from hitting us, I can make it hit us. Now think back of all the major changes in technology that have ever been used by, say, a government to do something hideous to a whole lot of people, and then compare that risk with the number of people who ever died from shit falling out of the sky. Well, recently it got over 1,000 for the first time ever in human history in Russia.
Seriously?
Yeah, that the meteor over, well, they didn't die, I'm sorry, injured, but a couple guys died. That was the first time ever in recorded history that shit falling out of the sky killed people. Okay,
You're
so
talking about the very famous explosion over Russia about 50 years ago.
Tunguska, nobody was within 100 miles of the place.
So you're not talking about that one.
No.
No, there was one in Russia not too long ago.
Yeah, it was like a big flash across
Yeah,
the sky.
it was a grazing atmospheric
Yeah.
hit, and the impact wave collapsed a building and some people died. But there wasn't much damage considering that this was, But the fact is that if you can have that much control over an astronomic-sized event, then it's a kinetic energy weapon, whatever you call it. And the size is a matter of opportunity. And the opportunity, by the way, Wilco, there was a month and a half ago, the nearest close encounter of a 2-kilometer sized object that we've ever seen happened. And nobody even noticed it, except for us geeks who pay attention to that stuff.
So let's say we have this fact pattern of looking back at history that advances in technology have clearly been weaponized. We can find historic evidence of that, right? And future technology, in the pace at which technology is advancing, is likely going to be more potentially dangerous and potent, as been pointed out by Steve and others tonight already, right? So I think a strong case could quickly be made for some type of overwatching body right? That's monitoring everything everybody does to make sure that you don't get the mad scientist in the basement with this enormous scientific capabilities pressing a button. Who in the world would give a monkey a machine gun? Right? Someone ready to,
If they had a chance.
right? Like who would hand over a loaded gun to a child, right? You know, who would do that? Someone.
4 people in the United States just last year.
Yeah, that's right. And what was the outcome, right?
They
So,
got killed.
so if you start to view incredibly high, potent, powerful tech on this landscape of it's increasing like crazy, and history serving as a guide, there is the mad scientist out there, maybe organized government, maybe other institution, maybe the single lone wolf in the basement that's ready to do it, and that will do it and has the potential of doing it, and history proves that to be true. So can we start making a case for the unbridled, complete 1984 monitoring of all human beings on this planet, for just the sake of security, so that we don't crack the world in half? Cosmo.
I think what you're proposing in a smaller scale is oversight, kind of an oversight organization. And that already existed when the atomic weapons arose. That was the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. And so here they are, scientists who are very knowledgeable about that kind of weaponry, and they're shouting from the rooftops. You're only 2.5 minutes away from
3 minutes.
doomsday. What?
They said it at 3 minutes this week.
They reset it to 3 minutes? It was at 2.5, and they think that it's went up. God,
Yeah.
that's worse. How can they do that? With the Trumpster saying he's going to lobby.
Well, now that was before Mr. Trump made his threats to Korea. This was about 2 months ago.
Well,
3 months ago.
I'll take bets that it'll go drop down to 2.5. Anyway, the fact is that here is a organization of scientists who are respected in their fields, and I think that may have been started by Linus Pauling, and a lot of other scientists. He got them together, and for that he won the Nobel Peace Prize. And so that organization exists, but then it is ignored, it is marginalized by the powers that want to use nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not use to blow them up, but to use it as a compelling force to bullying
Sure.
thing. And so that thing didn't work on the scale. And I think that then there's the other example where the American Psychological Association was hamstrung during the torture in Iraq, and then allowed all of the torture, actually had psychologists participate in it, work out torture programs, how best to torture. And so
they had to go redefine what they were doing, so it wouldn't be torture.
that's how they work.
Yeah, I know.
So the fact is that was a professional organization. It was supposed to control what those psychologists were doing, and it didn't. Now it has come back, and they've decided, oh well, it was bad news. But when the crunch came, they weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you got a bigger plan because it ain't working.
So when we look at any system really of exponential growth, any system, right? Bacteria doubling, it doesn't matter. An exponential system, okay?
Mm-hmm.
The number of intervals necessary to bring us to its max, to its precipice, okay, is way different than what it visually looks like. Let me give you an example. If you had a jar that could hold 1,024 bacteria, and you started with 1, go to 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, right, all the way up. You get to 512, okay? The jar is only half full.
Right.
So all those bacteria sitting in that jar might say, huh, what do we have to worry about? We just filled half of this thing, right? But in the next interval, it's full. And now they're done, right? Now they can say, well, oh, okay, what are we going to do? Let's get 10 more jars. You know, now it says, look, we have more than 10 times the capacity of this current jar. We're good to go. But how many more intervals do we have to go until those are full? 3 or 4. That's it. Right? So exponential growth is something that a lot of people don't kind of recognize its significance. So, because when you see the thing half full, it still seems like, boy, we have so far to go still. There's nothing to worry about. You see what I'm saying? But then that one next interval, and you're there. You're done. So technology is on this kind of growth curve right now. You see what I'm saying? And so if we say, oh, well, you know, yeah, there's some bad weaponry, there's some things going on, people are doing stuff with DNA, and yeah, there's this monkeying around with, you know, GMO foods and all this kind of, you know, stuff, but, you know, it's cool. You have to understand in this exponential growth how far we are to explosive technology, like incredibly leaps and bounds technology that we aren't even imagining right now. Like we don't have the framework, we don't have the context by which to imagine
Bombs that design their own delivery systems.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So I mean, well, so you are imagining that, but I'm talking about things that are unimaginable, and that's one of the things I want to talk about tonight. Is some imaginations that I've had, not for dangerous, scary technology, but for, you know, what this might mean. Like I use this example all the time. You try to imagine a color you've never seen, right? Without that context of that color you've never seen, to imagine it is not within my capabilities. Okay. And so the reason that's important is because we have this exponential growth that's clear, that's measurable, okay, in technological expansion right now that we're experiencing. And where do we go from there is such a huge unknown to most people. It's beyond the imaginations of man, collectively, in groups or in individuals. Yeah, some people will have insight and be visionaries on certain aspects or threads of that whole preponderance of technological expansion, but nobody knows where this is going. You see what I'm saying?
Well, knows, yes, but I mean, Jules Verne's was a good century ahead of his time.
And you look back over all the historic predictions of futurists, and you look at their models of projected growth, and you look at their predictions, and they're vastly wrong.
Pessimists.
Well, there's many wrong guesses. The question isn't whether there are or are not wrong guesses. The question is, if you were to take through the end of the 20th century, how much happened that you couldn't find in the Jules Verne's novel? The nuclear explosions, the nuclear detonations might really be the only example. In general terms.
Maybe in general terms, but if we apply post-rationalization, we can make it fit. If we applied basic, you know, raw empirical analysis, we'll find all kinds of problems. Like we'll find not even close to a symmetrical fit with what's happened between now and then.
And
Post-rationalization is a big thing. I'm sorry, Michael. And then Cosmo.
The fact is that Jules Verne never began to understand the implications of big data.
Well, and we can keep coming up with probably lots of examples similar to that. Cosmo?
You know, the idea that we couldn't imagine the future, and yet I would say that each of those leaps is a leap of imagination, a leap of a vision. I bet you I could do that. That kind of thing. And so it is driven by the imagination. Although we don't have one person that has the scope of the imagination, it is driven by the technology, and the newness of it is driven by the imagination.
That's right. Education is only going to be capable of providing you with the tool set of things of past, right? Things that are known. It does not have the tool set to prepare you to know the unknown. It's not possible. How is it possible? Education is a time machine, go forward in the future, to know what future tech or what future life is coming for the students to then come back in time and teach them. It's always teaching them old stuff. And when you look at our current school system right now, it's teaching stuff from the turn of the century, more or less, right? Why isn't it teaching? Why aren't they teaching programming? And I don't want to get deep down into education, but my gosh, if it's not teaching, didn't you say something? Transistor? I mean, bingo. If our students of today don't know how transistors work, can you quote that, Ben? Do you remember the quote?
Yeah, I do.
Please.
Remember the quote?
Please.
Transistor is to the modern age what the stone is to the Stone Age.
There you go. That's I love it, because that's such a symbolic thing. If a student of today doesn't understand how a transistor works, they're not even on the radar. You know what I'm saying?
And they don't even have to, even if they don't understand how it works, if they just knew what it did.
Right.
Really all they need to know is what
Right.
it did. Most
Right.
programmers
I
have
mean,
no
they
idea.
need to know
Right.
something about rocks, right? They need to know how to carve them out of the ground. They need to know how to shape them. They need to know how to glue them together. They need to know how to, stretch and art. They don't have to know all of those things. But my God, if they don't know
Well, the rock
one
is-
of those jobs,
It's a rock.
There may be in some trouble, right?
Job to a rock, right? They're in trouble.
So that's great. That's a great segue to the next two quotes. We kind of have another war quote here, unfortunately, but that's okay. It seems to be a theme with the technology quotes, but the one I have is not about that. So, the means by which we live have outdistanced the ends for which we live. Our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power. We've guided missiles and misguided men. Martin Luther King Jr., right?
Guided missiles.
Love it.
It's misguided man.
I love it. Right? So, to step away from the war kind of quotes, that a lot of them here. Oh, perfect. Hey, Ben.
Hey.
Wendy?
Hey.
Cool.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, well.
We were finishing up the last little bit of moving my brother out of my mom's.
Oh, no worries.
How boring.
Lots of food to pick from. What do you think? Breaks it in.
Cool. So the last quote is, sorry about this, but I had being a little arrogant here, sticking my own. Please.
Martin Luther King's.
Yeah, please.
I think there is something there, that our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power. Not to be dissing on the scientific power, but to say, why hasn't the spiritual power kept up?
Well, it's always pretty weak.
Why hasn't it? Why? Yeah, it has always been.
Look, I'm the first volunteer to take the contrary point of view, but this one is easy. How would you measure spiritual growth and generosity for humankind? What?
Seems
I can give you a
obvious to
literal.
me.
I can give you a literal measurement in distance to measure it for each person. The number of meters to the nearest suffering person.
Okay. That's
I
clever.
don't
That's
accept-
clever.
I don't accept it.
So what are we meaning
reasons.
by spiritual?
Maybe.
Fraction of suffering people or whatever.
It's thoughtful, Michael. That's thoughtful. I
Well,
like it.
what-
So I was thinking that I would propose that the answer to this question maybe is the degree to which people who are not genetically related are able to cooperate.
Okay.
And that does not include a dictator commanding both of you at the same time.
So I'd posit that similar to Michael's, not bad.
So in this particular quote on face value, right, he's clearly not, I mean, he's not trying to make a scientific quantified statement here, obviously, right? He's trying to make a metaphorical statement to be profound in a soundbite kind of quote, which I think is very well achieved here. I think that's a fantastic measurement, Ben, of, how we can start to look, that's the best that I've heard in a while on how you can offer some type of measurement to that. That's pretty good.
Well, are you talking about what Michael said?
No, I'm talking about Ben said about his, Michael's is good too, but I mean, how we could actually measure this spiritual power, this.
Good, you should say it again.
It's a measure of spiritual strength.
Oh, okay.
The distance in meters to the nearest suffering person.
Okay.
And so I guess what Martin Luther King is suggesting here is we need better ways to spiritual education.
And what do we mean by spiritual?
Well, that's back in chapter 1.
I see. I
But
shouldn't
some
ask it.
people
It's a
have
very good question.
Yeah, it is. It is. We could spend we can spend some time on that
And
one.
it's part of the reason why the spiritual endeavors of humanity have bogged down so far behind the scientific. They know what's scientific. We don't know what's spiritual. Obviously, they're going to
Fair
stay
enough.
ahead of us.
Well, I would
There's not much
argue
direct payoff.
that the scientific endeavors have given mankind more relief from suffering, have taken men's souls further, have done more to bring quality of life to more people than all the churches in history stacked and passed.
So I would say if you snapshot all of known history, you'd be absolutely accurate. But in 10 minutes, I don't know if that's going to still be true. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you know, there was the
You
Dark
guys don't-
Ages, burning witches, so that they
But-
might actually be
and
negative.
you guys
Are you
only need
referring to
one
September
day.
23 when
No, it's not.
Christ returns?
No. I'm not.
And the world ends?
No. No. I'm not.
I missed that.
No. I'm not referring to that.
Science
I promise.
only needs one bad day.
That's what
out
I.
of the next
Thank you.
millennium
That's what I'm saying. Yes.
to totally rebalance the book.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
And I think that this technological wonder can go for negatively if you have an ethics of greed, and it can go positively if you have an ethics of helpfulness.
I completely.
And each one of your technological benefits, there was a decision to make whether it would be harmful or beneficial. So all this benefit that you had, this guy who's inventing the washing machine, he said, dang, I think this would really help my wife a lot if I could invent a washing machine. And you can do that with everything technological. So you can't separate that ethical from the technological.
Okay, so that's, I was thinking that spiritual really is referring to ethics or ethical development.
I'd go
I
along
don't
with
know
that.
why we're calling it spiritual.
Because it's a beautiful word to use in a beautiful quote, and it definitely does, I think, get the point across in a metaphoric way. So I think that's why it's used
A lot
there.
of people understand it.
Yeah, I feel as if I do understand what he's saying here.
Even though it has nothing to do with spirits.
And I wouldn't think so. Yes.
You know?
So let's move on to some arrogance here. Like so amongst all these brilliant men, I put my own quote, right? So.
Right, there you go.
So, I just indict myself so then you guys don't have to do it. There's a serious possibility that when technology extends our capabilities, we will no longer regard biological beings as having meaningful utility. Right? And this includes human beings, of course.
Well, why should we be biased toward a particular material?
I happen to like you.
What if
I happen to like you too.
Germanium or mercury or what? Why does it matter what material I am?
What if we can take our consciousness and put it into
A
an
machine.
electronic medium?
Sure. Yeah, what if? Then we wouldn't have as much regard for our biological self as we do today.
I'm actually working on how to.
That's exactly that. You hit the nail on the head, Cosmo. What I'm saying here, you hit the nail on the head, right? Our technology extends our capabilities, extreme capabilities, right? We will start looking at biological beings as not really having much more utility left. They're not really good for that. Look what's happened to all other animal species on this planet.
Have we
Would-
done or not done this to some small extent with the telephone and
Oh, yes, we
the
have.
FaceTime and
Indeed.
the virtualization,
Mhm.
the time shifting, the television?
Virtual girl.
I think the television, you could argue that the television is actually an experiment in singularity because of the relationship that people have with the television. And if you like the relationship people have with the characters that are in the television, to some extent, I mean, they're very competitive with real relationships, right? It's very much a proxy for, very much an alternative to relationships, to the point where people may have deficiencies in personal relationships, or to the point where the value of humanity is diminished. And I'll give it as an example. The performing musician today has a much harder time finding an audience than before the Victrola.
You got a lot more competition.
I see what you're saying.
So I'm not sure if this is a line we have yet to cross.
So let's say, kind of what I'm thinking here is like a radical thing to think about, but let's say for argument's sake, I can pluck my eye out, my biological eye, right? Replace it with this bionic eye of extreme sophistication, and all of a sudden it enables my visual acuity like unprecedented, right? I can see miles in the distance, I can focus in and out, I can just do it by thinking. It's not an extra thing I have to do, it's just seamless, it's now integrated with myself.
You have eyes in the back of your head.
Yeah, I can have eyes in the back of my head. I can see in infrared, I can see in thermal, I can see all these things, and I can get a vision and an understanding of the world so profound that I could never have done with my biological eyes.
Like Geordi.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, perfect. Like Geordi from Star Trek, right? But he had there were some issues with that. I'm fantasizing maybe even a little further to where, oh no, not the later eyes. Like the later one were just built in. He didn't have that banana clip visor anymore, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah.
The later eyes, yeah.
Right.
So if we can do something like that, how would we then, as collectively, start to view the normal biological eye? See what I'm trying to say? The normal biological eye would be defective or vastly inferior to the mechanical.
But we
They're all
have
devices.
passed that threshold with the Wii remote. Well, it took us beyond the limits of the naked eye.
Did you hear what Ben just said instantaneously?
They're all
Say that again?
devices, and the interface it supports is bidirectional vector stream, such as in neural net.
So, without even hesitating, he proved my point. Right? It's just a thing. It's just a sensor. It's just and he thinks like that.
I don't know, I'm kind of emotionally attached to Miles.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're used to reading body language, I'm used to watching people's eyebrows go up and down, and their eyes dart around. I mean, you would just have to learn how to read that robotic eye.
Well, it could have eyebrows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Michael, please.
Does your eye, your magical, technological, magnificent eye, does it still weep?
If we want it to, sure.
Mine would.
I
Would we
I
want
think
it
we
to?
would put a
I don't know.
a
That's-
screen on there to
That's a great
put
question.
the image of
We'd be
tears.
so superior that we have no vulnerabilities.
Exactly.
We have no compassion for people who have vulnerabilities.
That's exactly what I'm saying with this quote. That's exactly what I'm saying with this quote. That's exactly what I'm saying. What you just said is, that's exactly what I'm saying. You summarized it perfectly. Because we will no longer regard biological beings as having any meaningful utility, right? And that includes human beings, of course. Of course it does. Because technology would be taking us in such a different direction so rapidly, and the biological human self would just fall away, right? So I believe that we have a future of extinction, human beings do. And I think it's going to come in one of two paths, okay? I think it's going to come in a path of a tech that someone presses the button, right? So powerful and so potent, whether it be the mad scientists or the rogue nation state, whatever it may be. That's one possible outcome. And the other way that we come extinct is we change through technology, through the symbiotic relationship we have with technology. We morph into a new thing. And that new thing crowds out the current existence of biological human beings. Transformers. So we become this new thing.
Borg.
And this Borg or maybe completely mechanical, inevitably, right? And then that crowds out the species, because that's the model that human beings have done with every other species on this planet that's inferior to us. We've crowded them out. We've removed them just not by malicious, not necessarily by malicious slaughtering. We just remove them into obscurity because they don't have any utility for our purposes. Unless, of course, unless they taste good. Then we have lots of them running around, right? But if they don't taste good or have utility to us, we push them away. They just go away because we deteriorate their habitat. We crowd them out. Okay? So imagine the future human in a different technological converged state, crowding out current humans. You see what I'm saying?
Not only current humans, but current life in general.
There you go.
So this is pretty awful, actually. I want to see myself as a part of an integrated whole life here on the planet. How can you make a machine that is more compassionate, that would value biological life, not separate itself from with no frailty?
Because right now, the future technology that we are going to create, okay, we are going to give it the properties of which we have, okay? We have that's all we have to work from. And so if you look at the way human beings have serviced underling creatures, okay, there is no doubt that the next generation is the next level would just do the same exact thing, not even with malicious intent.
An old computer and old devices still connect to the global network. I mean, most people just prefer not to use them. I mean, nobody's telling you you can't remain a human. If you don't want to upgrade, that's fine.
So you try to make things backwards compatible.
Sure, but you also just said no one's using it anymore because it no longer has the utility of the other new devices, of the new things that now exist.
How many Commodore 64?
You see, so human beings are going to, in the future, lose their utility.
Well, we run them in emulators.
Yeah,
The
but
games
is
are still around.
utility the only thing, the only measure
That
of
wasn't
value
the case.
in life? Utility?
No, it is not. But that is how we're training ourselves to think and act, and technology has a pull on us in that direction. For example, in the corporate world, you're a human resource.
Yeah, right.
You're a human resource, and it's plain language used that direct way.
An object.
Yeah, we should get rid of the corporations.
Well, that's another topic by far.
What they think.
So I'm just
So I have a thought before
That's
you.
kind of a machine.
Sure.
Corporations
Okay.
and
Talking about
Get rid of the people.
the extinction of the human genome. Presumably, I mean, it's happened in the past in one way or another, be with a seventh hominid or something on the planet.
sure.
It would seem that in the future there will be a representative of certain genes that are on the planet, and that other genes on the planet will be missing. In other words, the future hominid that replaces us is already here amongst us. We are either part of it or not part of it. Well, and we can group all of humanity into those two groups. We would have to ask then, what is the relationship between those two groups? How is one going to hedge out the other? What are the mechanisms of hedging? And there's an irony that the 1 percentile in the 1% language, you know, of all the riches in the world are held by very few people. It seems that the future is overrepresented by people who are not part of the 1%, if you will. This is the flip relationship.
Okay.
And we can even be more broad than that. Essentially, all of the civilized, all of the Western civilizations are in zero or less population replenishment. That the populations of the world today, and one would assume that this is related to whether they are or not in the group of future hominoids or not future hominoids. They tend to be pretty focused on being the future. And to some extent, they might be trading certain things with their dead enders in exchange for the future of the planet. And what if, to some extent, the transaction is something like this: fine, you have the wealth, I'll have the future.
We shall inherit something.
It's an interesting thought, but what would you, if you were insistent on being the future hominoid, what would you be willing to trade in order with the other half, the non-future, in order to achieve that end?
As opposed to what you would be willing to take?
I'd have to put some serious, personally think, put some serious thought behind that one.
Well, the value of the
So you're assuming that evolution will be a factor.
No, I'm not.
Well, your argument does. But CRISPR has something to say about that.
Right.
So technology can supplant everything about what we call evolution.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a
Absolutely.
very fast evolution.
Absolutely. So, Michael, I do agree with that statement wholeheartedly. In fact, I think human evolution and technological evolution are symbiotic. I don't not necessarily think there's a dividing line there. I don't think they're two separate entities. I personally see them as combined. It's a symbiotic relationship from my point of view. We had Steve and then Cosmo.
Craig Ventnor has already created artificial cells.
Yes, yes, I have that. Yep.
We were talking earlier about the imagination, and I think that science fiction is doing a pretty good job. And I think we've got the model of the Borg.
Sure.
And so we can look at that model, I think, as seeing that the integration of the biological with the technological, and the hive mind, too.
Yeah, I get a little hairy on that one because of the current biological mind, okay, has its built-in limitations and cannot handle the amount of input from that many other entities.
And
So,
yeah, we
I mean,
are
there's not-
connected, and a driving force is our connection with the internet. That can be viewed as the beginnings of a hive mind.
Okay, sure, fair enough. But okay, yes, I agree with that. But at any given moment, what capacity of the internet do you then possess in your own personal mind?
As much as your capacity of your mind
Of
is.
your mind, right? So
Yeah.
that naturally is a limitation to that potential like singularity. I know what everyone else is thinking at all times. You know, there's just not enough capacity there for anything close to something.
You can have a control unit monitor and
Yeah, oh,
limit
yeah.
what you can handle.
Yeah, great
I
point.
imagine we could do better than we are currently doing, though, in terms of interacting with large groups of other thoughts. We tend to establish rooms like this where
Mhm.
each thought has equal weight, or each thought is weighted on the vocal strength of the individual participant, but we could have an arrangement where the thoughts have some aggregate value, and that we
Mhm.
tend to hear more of something and less of it.
We could actually have Ben Rayfield talk about for a while his binary forest concept. It actually lines up with that. It's kind of ironic.
You know, I was thinking about these teenagers that are always on their cell phones,
Mhm.
and it seems to me that they have become virtual people.
Okay.
They're not necessarily interacting with the physical world,
Mhm.
with the biological world. They're interacting with this virtual space. And so what happens then when we identify ourselves as a virtual being?
Mhm. Can you
And-
answer that question?
What?
Can you answer the question you just presented? What happens? I'd like to hear what you think happens.
Well, I think you would become less materialistic in a way. I think that, imagine instead of just the phone that you're hearing, that we have something like the holodeck, and that you can interact with anybody that you want in this holodeck virtual reality in a way. And so this then becomes much more important than your
Real life.
your eating habits, or your sleeping habits, or any physical thing that you're doing. You're totally jacked in, and so you are grooming yourself for this virtual being. And depending on the context, you can switch into different rooms, different contexts, and you become a different virtual being. So you may have a whole array of virtual beings, and ones that you're grooming for a long time, and new experiments. So I think it would kind of decrease our instead of being materialistic, we want to have the up-to-date recording units for our projection into the holosphere.
Sure. So with that same holodeck kind of analogy metaphor, tying back to the comment about the kids on the cell phone, if we take the children of today, and I see a lot of what you're saying, you know, it's on the cell phone and cognitively in this virtual world and kind of becoming a virtual being to some extent, or at least thinking that way. When I have looked at the level of sophistication and emotional maturity of my child, that does a lot of that, okay, and I contrast that with where my development was at the same time, okay, based on old writings that I had from my mom and stuff, you know, that I can kind of get a big contrast. She's a light year ahead of me. So then what that makes me think of is that perhaps I am then, right, like I should be the one doing the adaptation, because that methodology has produced a better result to some extent. Probably not across the board, I don't know, no. And that's one of the big paradigms in this technological expansion. Another part of this technology philanthropy is that we have to understand is that the experiences of the next generation coming up among us, we do not have a precedent to understand that experience as they did in that child's minds. So that child has a juvenile mind in this technological landscape that we did not have when we were at that age. And so then to try to understand what that is exactly like, we don't have a context. You see what I'm saying? And so I'm not saying that that means we still can't be good people and good parents. And it doesn't create barriers. It can be used as a way to create a dialogue within the child to converge the worlds, to bring them into your fold, let them take them into their world, and then see where you go from there.
So I would ask Cosmo if we are currently at this table interacting in a concrete way, or if we're interacting virtually. Because
Buddha would say we're doing it virtually. That it's kind of really all virtual. We make it up. And so that is, I think, one of the keys to this virtual reality, is that it uses the imagination so much more and recognizes that imagination is the thing that is kind of like a driver to this virtual world.
We've had airplanes in here, we've had JDAM bombs, we've had World War III. I mean, none of that is here. We've made it all up.
It's in here, isn't it?
Well, whether we're talking by phone or by face to face, it's still the same set of imaginations and ideas, right? I mean, is it all that different?
We got Michael trying to jump in.
The world we are not capable of talking about is one where bandwidth and throughput are the core values of life. And that's what you have instead of wealth.
Yeah.
That's what you have instead of possessions. So it's
Thank you.
history is irrelevant. Resistance is futile.
There you go.
What about the bandwidth?
This is awesome
of
Star Trek
truck,
conversation.
carrying
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah. Well,
Bandwidth
and does this bandwidth, does it carry love? I mean, like a smile I give to someone, the twinkle in their eye. I mean, I suppose with different emojis and stuff, you can do that
Well, is
the same feeling.
is this virtual landscape possible to trigger the same emotional responses as the twinkle in the eye and the stuff that you talked about?
Yeah, I mean, is that not meaningful? Is love itself and kindness is, you know, can you really express it?
Well, on the holodeck, I think you can.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I can do it on the holodeck without any other humans.
Because there we
And
go
I
with the
can
utility
pick
of human
humans that I
beings.
know and have the holodeck play them the way I would like them to be played.
Yeah.
And
So you know exactly what the holodeck's going to turn into.
What is Ben's
that's a
smile?
good point.
So let me suggest, I think something that maybe you're alluding to,
Yeah.
that Cosmo is definitely trying to get at. And it turns this notion of communicating with somebody on the holodeck around. Maybe the question is not, do I enjoy, do I want, do I need to communicate with the person, with another person in the holodeck? That may all be true or not, I don't know, it may not matter. But I think each of us will know that there are times when we are with probably only one other person, and that together we are able to think bigger thoughts than we are able to think by ourselves. And so that communication makes us the best person, or the best version that we can be of ourselves. So it allows us to perform at a higher level. That's what's possible with two people. Not with every two people. There are many groups of people.
It's some kind of synergy or something, right?
Other people who do not elevate our ability to be human, right? But they might give us the opportunity to be generous or give or help or be helpful, or may make us feel better in many different ways. But these important exchanges are exchanges that advance something and maybe require, by definition, you were speaking of imagination. It might be that the future is one you can't imagine by yourself. But to Cosmo's point, somebody will definitely imagine it. And you're probably as capable as they are of imagining things. But it might be that it requires the elevation of humanity, really to have that partner in thought.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's 2 or 3 people. It's rarely a group of 5.
True.
But the question in the holodeck is, what are the limitations or requirements or technologies that allow that to happen? And one of the things about kids is they don't drive cars. We all arrived here in our own personal holodeck. The car, right, is essentially a holodeck, really. It allows people to move around and freely, and it expands the horizon of every individual within the city of Charlotte for one simple reason: they have the ability to find that person who by their ability to communicate, will make them a better person.
Sure, so the limitation of the imagination experiment, like the thought experiment that I presented, was in reference to how our actual experiences then put kind of a clipping level or a range by which we then have in that particular thread of imagination. So experiential things, and it can come through virtual experiences and through communications with others. So I agree with your comment, how that makes us better and can expand our imaginations. But our experiences are still very, very critical at how our potential for imagination is very much connected to our experiences in life, right? So a wide range of experiences almost automatically guarantees a wider potential of imaginative thought. Just that was the point I was making with the imagination to experience.
An argument for mushrooms.
I've never had them, so maybe I am and don't know it.
I'm just enthralled by your idea, Michael, about restructuring people that you know in the way you want them to be, in the holodeck, right?
What makes you think you're not doing it already?
Well, we tried, but they just don't seem to work out quite the way we want it. But what you could do as a holodeck experiment is, okay, I'm going to doctor up this person the way I want them to act in this kind of a situation. Okay, say that you, let's say that you, not in, it can even be in virtual reality. You had an interface, an action with some person. And then you say, okay, and that was a real person in virtual reality. They were reacting to you and you were reacting to them. And so you say, okay, let's do a rerun. I'm going to doctor this person up. And then I'm going to play this person, my doctored up person, when this other person comes online. And they get to see my doctored up person.
That totally happened on Star Trek. They had Reggie, the guy who was Murdoch on A-Team, right? And he was doing a fantasy in the holodeck, and he had Troy and Picard all acting stupid, like Musketeers and all that crap.
Yeah.
Remember?
Right.
And then when they came in on him and saw the fantasy, like you're saying, they were not happy at all.
And there was the dating site with the female chatbots.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Ashley Madison.
But actually, it could actually improve your relationship with the other.
Well, actually, in fact, it did in this particular context. Yes, you're right.
Okay.
You're right.
Well, is that similar to when maybe your husband is actually fantasizing about somebody else? Yeah.
It could be dangerous. You'd really have to be quite skillful at this. But that might actually raise the whole level of social consciousness in doing this.
Very well. That's a good point. I don't think very many people at this point in time, though, would be happy to look up at their partner and be surprised to find them wearing virtual reality goggles during the trip. Please.
About 17 years ago? Wow. There was a virtual reality website that I joined. And of course, we had to create our virtual realities in text, because it's all we had. But that meant that people who couldn't participate on that level thought it was boring and left every time. Because first of all, you have to be able to type at least 30 words a minute if you want anyone to hang around and talk to you. And you really quickly learn that, you need to use punctuation and capitalize only the first parts of the, you have to actually learn that you have to pretend to be real. You have to. Or else you're playing a game and they'll play a game with you. If you really want to try to have human interactions, which almost everyone did, or else they left. It was a great sieve. And what I found out was, over the years, 3 years that I was doing that, was reality it's the collision of everything you want and all the stuff you can't have. And you don't get to control it. But fantasy is all about you. You are what you pretend to be, because it wasn't your reality that made you this way. You chose it, every single bit of it. And so when you meet people in this environment, they're pretending that they are who they are in that environment. If you pay attention, you learn more about them than anybody who meets them in the street will ever know.
That's an interesting insight. From what I understand, there was a behavior modeling engine that went over just the likes in Facebook when that was publicly available. And they created a model where they can predict with higher accuracy a person's sexual orientation, their preferences, all these things about them, with a greater degree of accuracy than their parents could.
Exactly. And in this particular reality, you had to choose them from a list describing yourself when you joined, because it was a fantasy. You weren't really like this. So when you filled out the little thing of whoever you were, you chose sex and sexual orientation and outlook and orientation, and you got to write a description, and you pretended to be whoever you wanted to be. And then you tried to act like whoever you were pretending you were.
Sounds very comparable to D&D back in the day.
Except that you don't pretend that you're not you.
Fair enough.
You pretend this is you. And every single person had to call the bulletin board operator and have chat on the telephone and send them a copy of your driver's license, so everybody knew everybody was more than 18. Everybody knew everybody was an actual real person, but you never got to, he was the only one that ever knew that information. He would not say. And you could claim to be a woman and act like a woman and identify yourself as a woman if you chose, and maybe you were a woman and maybe not. But the fact was that over, like I say, 3 years later, yeah, there were some people who just came in and played games and then were gone. They were so trivial and so unimportant that you didn't pay any attention to them. But the people who were actually came back and talked with each other a lot, what you pretend says so much more about you than what the universe hands you.
Cosmo?
So let's say that we don't have, we're not limited to one virtual identity. We can choose a few. And so let's then say that we've gotten so enamored with this virtual world. We spend most of our time there. Yeah, we got to stop occasionally to go eat, take a shower, and go to sleep. But that's really where we're spending our time in this virtual world. And so, hey, that becomes us. It's not like there's a machine that's going to evolve and leave us behind. No, we're going to hop right on in there. And we've got our own virtual communities here and there, and that's how we interact. And it's not like there's any kind of sword of evolution that's going to cut us off. We can get into any one of these virtual realities that we want. Start our own. Yeah, we could do that. And so there's no death here. There's life in the virtual world. And when we can get a sophisticated enough machine that can kind of record and model our minds, then when our bodies die, hey, bye-bye, I'm still in that virtual world.
Oh, there is death online. Bunch of copyright people told Google they can't have a library of all the world's books, so you got to keep some of them in paper form only, which die sometimes.
Interesting.
Okay.
So
there's no mandatory thing that it has to die, except for these people that rules.
I think that's an example, though, of these binary choices about the future hominoids and the non-future hominoids. I assure you that hominoids that spend an inordinate amount of time in online chat rooms are going to find themselves disproportionately amongst the non-futurists.
Yes.
So
the super genius is hominids.
My bad.
So we would have a vulnerability if we somehow moved into a virtual existence, like we could take our consciousness, somehow get it into a virtual landscape, right? We'd have a vulnerability then naturally, right? Someone could pull the plug, someone could erase the disc, the medium could go. But that's no different than our biological selves right now. Take away someone's oxygen for just a certain amount of time, or take away their food supply, or whatever it is, with different degrees of time, right? You can take away choice nutrients from a certain population group, and within a certain amount of time, they're all dead as well.
You want to be on a peer-to-peer network so nobody controls it.
Oh, there you go.
Well, then the supercell that then controls that peer-to-peer network, then still, there's always a
Nobody
mechanical
controls
control. All right, EMP. I mean, you have a vulnerability unless you do some type
If there's a nuclear war, Bitcoin will survive.
Please.
Yeah.
And the AC asked, can entropy be reversed? That's a science fiction line from a science fiction story from the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
The AC was the analog computer. And the story goes on all the way through with people connecting to the analog computer, and they describe its growth in power and reduction in size till it's just a sphere in hyperspace. And it's connected via minuscule connections to all of the individual humans that are still alive in all of these places in the galaxy. And finally, all of those minds merge from many, many hundreds of thousands of years of mutual communication to the point where there is the mind of man and there is the AC. And that's the same thing. The question they keep asking is, well, we'll live forever. The number of stars is, the number of stars still shining is much, much smaller than it was when we first
See,
started.
I'd love to get into the science conversation there, because I think that's a bunch of crap. I think there's no way to know that. I think that's all just bunk science fiction from science. That's just all ridiculous stuff. Think about it. I'll do real brief to say how I personally can easily debunk that. We have the telescopic, the ability to see perspective requires 2 points, right? So our eyes see in perspective because we have 2 of them. Two vantage points at which we can then go by the angle to tell, right? So we also know that light is bent by gravitational fields, and there's all this dark matter, gravity all over the place. We don't even know where it's coming from and what concentrations. And our vantage point isn't even outside of our own solar system yet, with the best Voyager probe that now has sensors that are who knows how effective, right? And so we're a cyclops looking at a potential distorted field of information, thinking we know what the hell we're looking at. And we make all these conjectures and assertions about what it is that's there. And we do wild things like that. They say, oh, the whole universe is dying. We don't know how. Come on, this is all complete fantasy. Fantasy. I'm going with God compared to that. Okay? I mean, that is complete fantasy. That is just wrong. It's complete fantasy. And why people subscribe to this crap is beyond me.
You can see it at an angle because a black hole curves space, so you look around both the edges, therefore you have multiple.
And how does the light bend on the other side of that?
What?
How did the light on the other side that just got bent get bent before it was there?
By the laws of gravity. What do you mean?
Yeah, but how much stuff and material that's light years, hundreds of thousands of light years, has that light traveled around and bent around and curved before it hit that one thing and bent around that one thing? And now we're going to say, oh, the light bent around that thing, so that means that star is 100,000 light years that way. It's so ridiculous. It's not even funny.
Distance by the wavelengths of known atoms and molecules and the red-blue shift.
Yeah, but the thing is that the
right.
the
Sure.
Okay.
Let's take that.
The
We'll go with that.
expansion coefficient at 67 billion light years
Of light.
would be greater than c.
So right there you go. So do we know that that thing is 100,000 light years away, or is it 10,000 light years away? Come on, this is just all nonsense.
Just know that we couldn't possibly perceive it if it was 67 billion light years away.
Then there's the speed of light, right? Somehow the universe is expanding at this ridiculous rate, but if you calculate the speed of light, the light would never get there from that. It can't be where they say. It's just me doing simple math. I mean, this is all just, it's all just a faith-based system that's called education and science, because people want to have that comfort of knowing how things played out, right? So some think God is the right answer there, and some people think that the bullshit that science feeds us is the right answer too. And it keeps getting debunked over and over, and it never makes the text. It's just, it's really frustrating.
The speed of light is like the speed of sound. You just get a shock wave if you exceed it.
maybe so.
You can't exceed.
Anyhow,
Maybe you can.
I wanted to take the conversation back into the machine where my consciousness
Yes.
Okay, it's just gotten into the machine. My body died. Sayonara, I didn't want it. Wasn't spending too much time with you anyway. I was in my virtual worlds, and now, oh wait a minute, look, here's another module that I can adapt to my program. In it goes. Oh, here's another one. And so I continually evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, it's kind of like there's nothing fixed about my identity now. I am spread out.
Right, are you still human?
Oh, heaven no, I'm virtual.
Okay, so you now are agreeing with me about this human extinction.
What about the hardware?
But I didn't, the humans weren't, they weren't made as extinct.
Mm-hmm.
They became the computer. We hitched a ride and we're with it right now.
Yeah, the who maintaining the hardware thing is an easy solution. They already have factory floors where robots maintain the robots. I mean, that's simple.
Yeah. Well, and I was wanting to ask about your kids. Okay. Okay. So if Chris, if you're saying that the kid that's more into tech is more mature, in which way do you mean? I mean, are they not less social?
Sure. Greater maturity. It seems to me that the maturity level, as far as empathy for others, is much more advanced at that age than it was when I was that age. I was, much less sophisticated about social dynamics, social interactions, a much smaller world for me when I was a kid. Comparatively, when I make that contrast, that's what I think.
But if they were removed from their devices and just sitting in a room and having to talk with other peers, are they okay like that?
I'm not sure.
No, they wouldn't know what to do.
I'm not sure. I do know, though, for child psychology, that if they become asymmetric enough with their peer group, it's very psychologically damaging.
Yeah.
So if you have a bunch of kids and they're kind of doing certain things, and then you exclude your child from ever doing those certain things, you can be really harming them, because the psychological damage that can be created from being asymmetrical to their peers can be profound. So that's just something we always have to keep in mind and balance as a parent, that factor.
You're
Right?
talking about, like, if you say no Facebook, no Twitter,
So let's move into the
no Barbie program.
let's move into the technological philanthropy concepts, and then back into this fun, awesome, cool discussion about fantasy and sci-fi, because that's way interesting. Cool. So my next slide is about technology philanthropist. What would a technology philanthropist be? And so I'm saying one who believes technology should be implemented and advanced for the betterment of all of humanity. Okay? And that's a big statement. You're saying all of humanity. It's not an exclusive club that technology is servicing. It's an all boats rise together phenomenon, and technology should be consciously employed in that manner, is kind of the claim I'm making here.
Well, all boats might rise, but some might rise faster.
Potentially. What we see, I think, over if we look at the, not beyond the weaponization, if we look at the utilization of technology for a tool to virtualize or to gain an abstract perspective or an advantage over others, I think you can find lots of profound uses of technology in that manner as well. So if you take warfare and loosely start to, if you take the essence of warfare, the definition of warfare, and you start to loosen it a little bit, right? You can see technology used in very diabolical or in advantageous ways of one group over another, all throughout society and all tiers of society, very much so. I can prove this very simply by saying NSA. Okay, if I know everything about you and you know nothing about me, I naturally have a huge advantage over you in all different dynamics. Okay, that's just one example. Sorry to go through this quickly. I want to get back.
Wait a minute. So your kind of criteria for using this philanthropy is that it be for all humanity.
Correct.
Okay, so it can't privilege one.
That's right.
Against
It would be considered inappropriate in that paradigm, immoral, to allow one group access or advantageous use of a technology over another. Yeah. Steve, do you have something? Oh, sorry.
So I think you're, wading into a paradox, right?
Yeah, sure. I can see that. Probably a bunch of them. Yeah. But it's a thought experiment on looking at how we're using it now, and then saying that I think someone or some group of people that have some good thinking capacity can then start to evolve the way that technology is currently employed, because I think our lives might depend on it. Because remember, my premise was that we're going to go one of two ways: some mad scientist or rogue nation pressing the button, right? Or technological convergence away from who we are today as a species into this new thing. Michael Ray's CRISPR. There's already technologies on the horizon that are redefining humanity, no doubt about it. We're already putting things into our body, pacemaker, all these prosthetics, internal prosthetics, you name it, cochlear implants. There's a guy in Michigan with a bionic eye. These things are all there, right? And they're just going to increase more and more into the future.
So your thought experiment is basically the Second Amendment for technology.
I love it. It's great. Well said.
The one about guns.
Indiscriminate distribution of technology or generous distribution of the benefits of technology.
Well, Ben believes that everyone should have the launch codes.
Yeah, but I believe that it should take, say, 1 million people activating them at once, any million or any 10 million, whatever, for it to actually work.
Okay. I didn't remember that
How
part
many
of
people
it.
are there in North Korea?
Yeah, right.
Well, you make the number high enough, you might give some people
North Korea
more
plus 10.
vote than others.
So
maybe they have to be located, not co-located.
So let's look at choice when how we employ technology, and let's look at choice in general as a mechanic as being used through technology as a special thought experiment here, right? So this notion of default choice, we've talked about that kind of a few times before. It's what you get when you don't choose, okay? And the majority of our choices that affect us every day are default choices. They're being chosen by somebody else or some other system, not us, and that's directly affecting us on our behalf. All the laws, all the way society is predicated, all the culture is being chosen by society at large or by someone who's consciously manipulating these things. And then that's actually causing us to then get that by default. That's what we get, right? So default choice is prevalent. And choice array creates another, I have another word up there called choice array, which is a choice array is it's a secondary form of choice illusion, and it's another way to get default choice. If I give somebody an array of choices, or if I give population at large an array of choices, but a majority of that array is a certain choice, that's a secondary form of a default choice, because the overwhelming majority will still be choosing that pigeonholed into those paradigm, okay? So it's a false choice, and it's because at large, the example is access to high calorie, high sugar foods in really poor neighborhoods, okay? So basically, the choice that somebody has living in certain neighborhoods is not fresh vegetables or Twinkies or soda pop, right? It's just all bad choices.
Candies or cookies.
Yeah, right, candies and cookies. And that gets us into choice illusion. Choice illusion is where I give you an illusion of choice. Do you want peas or carrots with your dinner? Okay? I didn't say, what do you want with your chicken? I said, with your chicken, do you want peas or carrots? So I've decided already for you that you're going to get chicken and peas or carrots. You're going to get a vegetable. I've already chosen for you chicken and vegetables, right? But I've given you this false choice. I've said, do you want peas or carrots? And with that false choice, that person feels like they've had a choice. They feel like
they have one bit of choice.
Yeah, you're right. To a scientific, logical mind, they've had one bit of choice, yes. But to the human psychological mind, they feel as if they have then exhibited a choice, and they were given a choice. But they actually were not. Okay? Yes, please.
There's a lot of
There's
choices
another
made.
way to arrange that.
Sure.
You give them a choice of a menu or a 755 item a la carte.
Mm-hmm.
And they can spend as long as they want choosing among the 750 items, and they must have 1 from column A and 6 from column B, or less than 6 from column B, which in case they, and a whole set
And
of
they
rules
must stand
making
on
their
their
choice.
foot, on their
And
left
what
foot.
you've done is you've made it so difficult to exercise your choice
Mhm.
that you're going to go with one of the menus because it's just easier.
So the obfuscation of choice, in other words.
Yeah.
I give my children 2 choices: eat or starve.
Wow.
One choice.
I think you should learn how illusion of choice works.
Or just learn how to cook for yourself. That's what you need.
That was the one my
Teach a man to
That's
fish.
the one my mother used.
Right.
Do you allow them to cook?
If you don't want this, go make something else.
Fair enough. So the last one on this list is implied choice. And implied choice is a very powerful psychological effect that happens to people. The implied choice is what is implied you will choose. Okay? So when their society at large has an implication set up for you on what you will choose, that's a big predicative index on what you actually will choose.
Airport security, if you don't like it, don't fly.
Fair enough.
That's not implied choice, so what's an example of?
Sure, so here's an example of implied choice. I'm a Democrat, let's say, and my friends are Democrats, and blah, 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 and there's a presidential election, I choose Hillary Clinton. That's all my friends and all my family, and to myself to some extent, it's implied that I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton, because I've identified in my peer group, I've identified with myself, and I've identified, across the board, that I'm a Democrat, okay? And so I might not like her at all, okay? But it's still implied that I'm going to vote for her, and that has a heavy influence on my choice. That's an implied choice. It's implied that you're going to vote for Hillary because you're a Democrat. And that's actually one of the reasons I believe she lost the election, is because her and all of her people implied that all those people will make those choices, and they were wrong. Right?
And that's true of gender identity.
Oh yeah, all kinds of it. It's true across the board. It's probably one of the largest on that list of choice effectors. Yep. So I just wanted to raise that because this ties back into this technology application. So when technology is now the prevailing force in our society, and it's going to increase in the future, of making more and more increased choices for us every time. So more of our choices every day through the application of technology is being made for us by automated systems. Okay? Think about that. So now more and more of our choices every day are being made by automated systems and technology. Basically how it's programmed. Okay? So what that's doing, the net effect of that is it's steering our culture in an actual direction. The net effect of that, the largest thing that affects our minds beyond choice, is our culture. Okay? And I can make a really solid case for that, I believe. Is that culture is the prevailing thing that influences our minds more than anything. So then you take that to the higher level, what's influencing culture more than anything? And I believe that's technology.
Are you leaving friends out of that, or are you including friends in that?
Friends?
In the cult.
Generally, our
Cult?
we're highly influenced by the people that we associate with,
Yes.
or
Yes.
as you were suggesting earlier.
Yes.
Are you
Sure.
including those in the society?
Mm-hmm. Because your peer group is mostly influenced by society at large, by culture, society at large. And so then, even if that's your primary source of how you behave, by emulate that behavior, you're still getting then the predominant cultural effects through that medium anyway. Whether that be family, whether that be through church, what supersedes all these groups? Society at large, right? The culture at large. And that culture at large shapes the minds of man more than any other force. It's extremely powerful force.
And so the people that are sort of living outside the culture, it's somebody is sequestered.
Inside and outside the culture. There are many cultures. We
Yeah, there's countercultures.
Right.
that were-
But one second, Michael. But that multicultural creates a new landscape that we would call culture. The culture of that group, or it doesn't matter how far out you go. There's still a predominant prevailing culture, and that culture is what shapes the mind of the people, whether it be in a subculture or all that doesn't matter. It's still the cultural net effect is the biggest predicator of what influences the mind of that human being more than any other thing.
So there was
See
a
what I'm saying?
recent study of shared articles in Facebook that showed in this country two very distinct, concentrations in the scatter graph.
Mm-hmm.
And this happened to be around whether one was politically left or politically right.
Sure.
But there was a time it was presumed that people leaned left and they leaned right, but that they were all part of a sort of single bell-shaped distribution. And that bell has really split.
Well, every
So-
bell
There
has
there
other
was a
dimensions
center
in the
one
middle.
before, yeah.
Okay.
We have two centroids and really like a profound gap
Mm-hmm.
between them, in which basically very little information is going left and right. People on the left are not sharing with people on the right, and people on the right are not
Sure.
sharing with people on the left.
Sure, it's a polarizing effect.
So I think that we might well be living in at least a sort of bi-stable society,
So,
if not 3 or 4 or 5.
so to my point there is that then would you not assume that someone who self-identifies as a real leftist, right, or real liberal lefty, right, would then take on the prevailing dominant viewpoints and traits and ideologies of that group? I think yes, the graph itself shows that. So that becomes then the predominant culture that's governing that person's life and their ideas. And their mind
Politics is
dimension.
not the
And
only
it's not
major
a
power.
single-
Yes, it's never singular threaded. I'm saying it's the net effect.
Not a single social.
Of course not. It's never single threaded.
I don't think there's a single society, not here.
Life is complicated.
Yes, it's always complicated, but what I'm saying is that it's the net effect. It's not, there's so many variables, but the net effect.
But see, both of you were making the opposite ends of the same mistake. You're believing your generalizations and he's believing his dichotomies. They're your generalizations and they're his dichotomies.
Okay, so if I'm making a generalization statement saying that one's culture that one finds himself in is one of the largest, if not the largest, influencer on their mind, how is that an incorrect generalization?
It doesn't matter whether.
Well, you said I made a mistake, so I wanted to
The
qualify.
mistake is assuming that that's going to be a predictor on an individual basis.
Yeah, I'm a heretic.
I think there's another.
No, it's absolutely not on an individual basis whatsoever.
I think-
Absolutely not.
Wait a minute, I think what Ben was saying is that we don't have one culture, that there's two cultures here. And so by collapsing that, you're not seeing the distinctions between what those two cultures are. And to back up that, once you've got that polarization, you've got allegiance happening that draws you
to their side, if you believe in that, if you are committed to that allegiance, then you are drawn to that one side. You also have an opposition to the other side. And so here you have a kind of like a magnetic force going on here, where it's drawing allegiance to two sides and oppositions to both of them.
So now I say, in American culture, it's very common for the duopoly, for the Democrats and the Republicans, right, to form, just by that fact that that's in our American culture, to have two pockets of political ideology appear. That's exactly what we see. So I'm saying, in American culture, that's what you get. You see what I'm saying?
So what information can you glean with American culture that you can't glean from the Democrats and the Republicans?
Easy. When I look at political orientation and viewpoints therein, okay, I make my same generalization. I say, in American culture, a predominant force, a prevailing force, is that people tend to be polarized into one of these two groups. And then I canvass all of society, and the scatter plot lines up perfectly with that assertion, right? Because the culture is steering people in one of those two pocketed directions.
Yeah, but you're saying actually that our culture is two cultures, really.
Okay, wait, so if I then say, it's all about what I put on my graph, right? Because if I then go and I say, hey, obesity, American obesity, the trend is Americans are more obese now than they've ever been, right? Blah, 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 we all have known that, right? So I say American culture has predominantly shaped Americans to be fatter, right? We're wrong.
You're right.
It's probably technology too.
Well, so then I look at, okay, since culture is such a heavy, okay, I'll even back off on culture being the predominant steering of the minds of man, okay? And go with it is, just say it's a factor, okay? An important factor. Now I say, what steers that more than anything? What steers culture at large more than anything in the modern context? And I would argue that's technology and advances in technology.
The news.
The news, which is coming through us through all these arrays, different mediums of technology. So technology and money, yeah. So technology, though, like, look, you made the statement yourself earlier about the children with the technology, with the, you know, and made some words about that, about how, you know, it's almost like they're virtual people to this extent. So it's that technology shaping that culture so much so, right?
Yeah, but I can cut and dice culture all over the place. I can say, okay, we've got a culture of pro-technology, but we've also got a culture, maybe smaller, of anti-technology, of anti-science.
Sure we do. We can always find opposing viewpoints.
To think that, to lump it all together into the American culture is kind of like destroying the distinctiveness of all of the subcultures. Yes. I mean, you could say that that we're all, that American culture is technological based, but you know, there's subcultures that are not. And I know I said subculture, but it's not a subculture in the sense that it feeds off of the superculture.
So why in North Korea don't they allow their citizens to get on the internet?
Because the government would be so strong.
I would
Well,
assume so.
They would be infected by the evil ideas of
Yeah, that's right,
Western
right?
culture.
Because that technology, allowing that technology would knowingly have a huge impact on that internal culture, which is quite asymmetric with the global culture we're seeing, right? There's the answer.
But it does exist as a separate culture.
Sure it does, but I'm saying it's a contrived environment in this case. It's a manufactured environment specifically to steer the culture by metering the technology. It's an example of an intentional control of a culture through technological manipulation, is what I'm trying to say.
So are they allowed to leave?
No. Bill, you had something?
Don't go visit.
It seems to me that one thing I notice is that you are referring to technology as being like an agent, an independent agent that is then controlling culture and therefore controlling us. And I don't think that's the only paradigm that you can use. The other is that technology is a tool, and that what happens is it increases the rapidity of cultural change or cultural processes, but that basically we're still dealing with the way we humans behave and think and construct cultures that indeed
Yeah, you're right.
have effects on us.
Yeah, I do not draw a line between those two things.
Between what two things?
I do not believe that human beings, the way humans think, and technology have a distinction. Okay, so if I take a medicine every day of my life, if I take a pill, swallow a pill every day of my life, that pill and the effects of that pill are now part of who I am, okay? I am saturated 24/7 in some type of technological landscape every part of every one of my days, okay? Yes, I can go to an insulated environment where I'm not, sure. But since it's so saturated into my environment, my psychology, my understanding, my capabilities every day with the car example, okay? It is ingrained in who I am. It's part of me. The technology that I exist with is an extension of me. It's part of who I am, whether I like it to be or not.
Even a book is technology, right?
Yes, but I mean, what I'm talking,
Yeah.
I mean, I think you kind of see what I'm saying.
so even when I was young, yeah.
I'll call a book a technology. And when I read a book, the story gets in me, right? So, so I don't draw a separative line between where I end and technology begins. I think that it's a convergence, and it's just going to continue to increase that way into the future. That's my belief system.
So the concept of of the tool is not a good concept. It's not.
I don't think so, because we're talking about a different paradigm. Because when I think I and probably a lot of people, when you think about tools, you think about a Stone Age man using a club and a rock to do something. You know? No. Like I'm saying that's how I think of it. And then modern day, though, there's not this distinction. It's surrounding us all the time. We're under these bright lights. We're in an artificial environment all the time.
You're a resource.
Because I'm a resource.
I think I would characterize technology as a terrain more than any other thing. It's the terrain which has, and just like the rest of the terrain, it's changed during my life. The terrain is nothing like I remembered it when I was young.
Sure.
And that's including the technology. And all of the things our culture does are affected by the terrain, and we affect the terrain. So it's both directions. But I don't think it's gotten to the point where it's the same thing as a tool anymore, because a tool is a thing that does what I designed it to do, and that's not what technology has gotten to be. It's the thing that does what I designed it to do and what somebody else thought of doing it, and then also a bunch of stuff that nobody ever realized it could do. But when you get back to culture, I think that you have to look at the simplification of it. Eric Hoffer, when people are free to do anything they want, they usually imitate each other.
Sounds great. Yeah, that's exactly what I say about culture, is that it's giving us the monkey see, monkey do. There you go, Bill.
So what about
giving us the monkey see, monkey do.
The monkeys are back. On the other side,
Sorry, I couldn't resist. But
on the upside of that, it increases our empathy, because by seeing somebody doing something, you know how to do it, and seeing them suffer for doing that something, you have felt suffering for that.
That's what, in this technological philanthropy concept, I definitely have a very desired interest to look into the effects of every one of the components that make a person, and how it jives or how it resonates into each aspect. Empathy would be one of them, right? Technology can be used very much so to desensitize us, to reduce our empathy in many ways. It could be used to extend it and expand it. How does that interplay? And we should consciously look at doing, like, with a purpose and intent. The net effect of technology, I believe, would be helpful to humans if it increased our empathy, right? But then let's get into the nuances of that and discuss it. That's why this technology philanthropy concept can be so big, because we can look at how technology influences each aspect of the human dynamic, and then consciously steer that. But we're out of time. There's like a dozen gems that I think I want to get to in the technology philanthropy concept, and the next week's topic hasn't been picked, so it'll be technology philanthropy part 2. How's that sound? And then one last thing is Steve.
What
you had
about
some-
forced choice? I didn't see that on there.
Forced choice, yes. I imply that's not choice, but
Well, when you must make a choice, that's a forced choice.
sure, okay. I didn't think to include that one. So that's a good point.
Well,
Forced
if you just had the option, do nothing, then you still must choose.
Yeah, when
Well,
you
that's
come to-
default choice.
When you come to a T intersection, you're forced to make a choice. You can't just keep going.
Good point.
Turn around.
Good point.
The concept of choice is problematic.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Itself.
yes it is.
Mind by the cross.
So just for next week as a teaser, so we're going to do technology philanthropy part 2, and I'm going to get into some of the actual more philosophical concepts of technology philanthropy, and definitely encourage the sci-fi discussion because that was cool. And but as a teaser for next week, this is one example of studying technology philanthropy, why it would be important. When we look at this thing of statutory laws, if somebody who is over 18 goes after a young lady, let's say, or lady goes after a man or whatever, who's underage, we have definitive laws in the books that protects that minor from the older, more sophisticated, more emotionally intelligent, more possible to coerce, right, adult mind. So that we protect children naturally from the adult mind, predatorial, especially if it's a predatorial perception. Okay, so if some guy that's like 23 years old is trying to get with a 15-year-old girl, we try to shut that down. Okay, well, why do we try to shut that down? Obviously for obvious reasons, but second of all, because that mind, that young juvenile mind, doesn't have the emotional maturity and maybe not even the logical or emotional development to properly handle the adult mind trying to be coercive. Okay, so we naturally put in protective laws because we would like to protect those that are vulnerable or otherwise not able to make certain decisions. There's also contract. You can't contract with a 12-year-old, right? You can't sign a contract and have it be binding. So there's these statutory laws in place for a whole array of obvious reasons. But what we're not looking at as obvious is that when technology, and people employ technology, super advanced technologies, that the net effect of that is so far advanced in us. Imagine this hyper-intelligent AI that's 10,000 times smarter than you, right? That has a lifetime of your historic data accessible to it. Okay. Wants to get you to do something. That would be more likely to happen than it would the statutory laws. And there's absolutely no protection for any adult or any other person or any institution on the books at all protecting you from that type of thing. Okay. And we need to stop looking at things in terms of age, this draconian, stupid way to look at things, and we need to start looking at capacity. Because if I'm up against something that has 1 million times my capacity, it's no different than, it's like taking candy from a baby. I'll agree to anything. And it's not because I'm dumb, it's because proportionally I have no way to compete with that sophistication. And this is the kind of thing that we're facing in the future, and I think that we need to start taking a hard look at those type of things to make sure our future is not such a abusive or exploitative future across the board.
Now, are you saying that AI would threaten you, or?
No, I just say that it would just be able to coerce me so easily.
It'd take advantage.
You wouldn't even need to coerce you.
But again, you're making the technology be an agent.
Specifically to the capabilities of advanced
It would be
AI.
Pretty hard
yes.
for me.
Yes, you're
You
right.
would, no.
Unless I
We should discuss
actually
that further.
No,
That
it wouldn't
agent.
either. You would be so easy to predict.
So we
I
did go-
can predict you, and I'm not a super AI.
Sorry for going a couple minutes
I
over,
am
so
easy
we're
to predict,
officially
but-
closed, officially over. But sorry for going over today.
That doesn't mean
So
that-
interesting.
So I had a
Doesn't mean that
proposal
predictions will
for
align with
consideration
you.
on the on the topic, and that is that without technology,